Do you have stubborn research questions that you just can't figure out the answer to, and you've wanted to use Y-DNA but just not sure how to do it? Well, this presentation is the one for you. Hi, I'm Rick Wilson, and I've been working with Y-DNA since 2006, and I have several strategies I want to present to you for how to use Y-DNA to answer some of your genealogical research questions, and we're going to use targeted DNA testers to help. So this presentation, I'm going to briefly describe what Y-DNA is and how to formulate genealogical research questions and turn them into testable hypotheses. We're going to use targeted DNA testers and talk about the four major types of research questions that are perfect for Y-DNA. As just a very quick introduction, Y-DNA is the one that gets passed down from father to son, which is perfect for letting us trace backwards in time that particular paternal ancestry. Now, when it comes to testing Y-DNA, Family Tree DNA is the premier place to do that. They offer three different tests: Y37, Y111, and the big Y700. I'm going to very briefly talk about what each one of these are, but if you want to learn more about it, I encourage you to look at my handout for more information. The Y37 and Y111 test different markers than what the big Y700 tests, and I want to talk about very quickly about what these differences are. So the Y37, Y11, and the big Y700 test something that's called short tandem repeats, or STRs. They're looking for patterns in our Y-DNA that repeat at a particular marker. These mutate on a regular basis, but not so frequently, but frequently enough that when they do, they get passed down to future generations. But what makes them a little bit more problematic is that they can mutate back to their original value and thus kind of mask the genetic distance or how closely related two individuals are. But it is good for general relatedness. Are these two individuals related on the paternal line? The big Y700 also tests STRs, but it also tests something else called a single nucleotide polymorphism, or a SNP. And what makes this one even better to use is that it mutates less frequently, and when it does, you inherit it. It is passed down from father to son, but it does not mutate back to its original value. And so when we have that, we are able to more reliably indicate whether two people are related in genealogical time along their paternal line. Now, when we start using Y-DNA, we're going to start off with a research question, a general genealogical research question. This is a more focused inquiry when what you want to learn about an ancestor. That might be like, where is my ancestor from? Or who is the father of my ancestor? Now, we want to take our research questions and move them into a hypotheses because these are more testable statements. They're based off of some amount of evidence that we've collected thus far that we're able to create a statement that can be more accurately tested with Y-DNA. And that might be a statement indicating, for example, that my ancestor is from Ireland, or this particular individual is my ancestor's father. With Y-DNA, we have generally four research questions that it's perfectly suited to answer. The first one is ancestral origins. Where in the world did our ancestor come from prior to its present location? The second one is related to genetic networks, which is associated with autosomal DNA. We often find a group of matches that are all shared with one another, but we just can't figure out how. If we find a particular unlinked family cluster, we can take one of a paternal descendant from one of those unlinked family clusters, test it to determine whether that is potentially how we are related. We can also use Y-DNA for unknown parentage. When we were trying to figure out who is the parent of an ancestor, and particularly we're looking at paternal ancestry. And the fourth is relatedness. Can we determine whether a group of one or two other men or more are related through paternal ancestry? We can test that with Y-DNA. So when we go from hypothesis testing, from research question to hypothesis testing, we usually are testing ourselves or a representative of ourselves if we are female. For example, testing your brother, your father, and uncle. And we use another tester, a targeted tester, to compare our Y-DNA to them in order to see if they are a match that can help us answer a question. So when we are going to use Y-DNA, there's the three tests that Family Tree DNA offers. So which one is the right one? If you are testing yourself or someone who is your representative, like your brother, uncle, father, I recommend jumping right into the Big Y 700. It offers the most value because it tests both STRs and SNPs, but it is a little bit more expensive, costing several $100s. So if cost is a concern, you might want to start with the Y37 test first. And Family Tree DNA tells you whether you have a lot of other matches, either at the Y111 or the big Y700 level. And if you do, you can later upgrade to it. For your targeted DNA tester, somebody else that you're looking to compare your results against, I recommend starting with the Y37. Because if you have somebody who you can't guarantee or confirm their paternal generational links, then take that Y37 test for them. Confirm that they are a match to you or your primary subject, like your brother or uncle. And then if they are, then upgrade them to a more robust test, and hopefully that would be the Big Y. So with that in mind, let's jump into a couple case studies that I have about how you can use Y-DNA to answer your research questions. So the one in particular that I'd like to start with, and this is related to my own research, I wanted to find out where my Wilson ancestor was from. He was born about 1715, immigrated to outside of Philadelphia, and I believe he is the immigrant ancestor. In reviewing my autosomal DNA matches, I noticed that I had a cluster of matches that were from Pennsylvania and probably related to my Wilson line, and I had a cluster from Northern Ireland. And they had within it Wilsons that seemed to match some of my Wilsons, but I couldn't figure out the connection. So my research question was, where in Europe was my Wilson line from? So turning that into a hypothesis, and based off of some of the autosomal DNA analysis that I had done, my hypothesis, or what my testable statement is, my Wilson line is from Northern Ireland. And I'm going to use the Big Y for that to test it. So what I did is I took a Big Y DNA test, and what I learned was there were a number of DNA matches that I had that were known descendants of John Wilson. And it wasn't by coincidence, because as you'll learn throughout this presentation, I actively recruited individuals from my line to test. And here they are on this paternal family tree. What you see here are, what I have circled there is haplogroups, which are branches of the paternal family tree. And my particular branch is highlighted there in orange, and it is IY106972. And that's my particular branch. But what was interesting to point out was that some of these other groups, these other branches or haplogroups, all had their earliest known ancestor from County Fermanagh in Northern Ireland, which seemed to match what my autosomal DNA test results had found. There was one group that was their earliest known ancestor was from County Tyrone, also in Northern Ireland, which was adjacent to County Fermanagh, and probably likely migrated either from County Tyrone into Fermanagh or vice versa. But it seemed to show overwhelming evidence that my ancestor was likely a most recent immigrant of Northern Ireland before arriving the Philadelphia area. My next research question is related to genetic networks, and genetic networks are associated with autosomal DNA matches. When I was reviewing my autosomal DNA matches, I found a group of matches that seem to all descend from a William W. Wilson and his wife, Louisa Lewis. And as you can see from the image below, on my family side, I had a number of matches that descended from my John Wilson immigrant ancestor, with most of them being on my side of the family tree, which is John Wilson, born 1784, is one of my direct ancestors. So you can see the number of matches I had within the cluster of these autosomal DNA matches. And genetic networks are nothing more than a group of shared matches that all likely descend from a common ancestor. This unlinked William W. Wilson and Louisa Lewis family cluster, there were a number of matches that descended through known children of them. So it appeared to be a Wilson match. But what I couldn't discern from this was that also as part of this cluster, there were some Boyd matches and McMaster's matches. Now, I have those on my line, but I couldn't be sure if William W. Wilson is related on my Wilson line, or was it coincidental and this is a separate Wilson, and we know how common Wilson names can be. So I needed to be sure that the connection was on Wilson, or it was on Boyd or McMaster's. So my research question is, how is William W. Wilson related to me? And my hypothesis was that perhaps he was a descendant from my Wilson line, but through a line that I hadn't yet built into my family tree. And so what I did was, I of course had tested with the big Y, and I found a descendant of William W. Wilson that descended directly on the male line, Wilson line, and I had them take a Y37 DNA test. And I wanted to start at the low level because I wanted to make sure if it was a match. If it wasn't, then I would not waste my time pursuing the big Y for this particular example. So both testers, myself and the known descendant, which we will call B, of William W. Wilson, it was a match on the Y37 level. And it had a genetic distance of 1, meaning there was only one mutation across those 37 markers that was different from what I had. So it appeared to be fairly close. And because it was a match, what I did was I then recruited other individuals to test with the big Y. And the way the big Y works, the more you have tested within a particular branch, the more refined your results can be. Now, you don't need to test 20, 30 people to refine it, but I find that testing 1 or 2 more really helps to refine these results. And so I recruited them and all encouraged them to take a big Y. And you've seen this before in the preceding example, that all of these individuals seem to descend from my particular branch, which is the IY 106972. Now, so somehow this particular sub-branch of William W. Wilson fits in with mine. Now, I use this to refine my documentary research and what I was able to discern through Y-DNA, autosomal DNA, and documented records that William W. Wilson was most likely the son of William B. Wilson, who is a son of John Wilson, who is also one of my ancestors. And coincidentally, and probably not a shock to you, but John Wilson married Elizabeth Boyd, and she was the daughter of William Boyd and Mary McMasters. This is why I saw some of the results that I did in autosomal DNA with Boyd, McMasters, and Wilson. But I needed to feel confident that my connection was on the Wilson side and not somewhere else, because it would have been pretty much a jump to conclusion that, oh, it's a Wilson, it's got to be a Wilson match. I needed to prove it. I can't just assume that. And so Y-DNA helped me to do that. My third example is unknown parentage. The William B. Wilson that I mentioned in the preceding example, I found in the year 1835 an indenture between Catherine Eckleberry and William B. that she indentured her 2-year-old son to him so that her son, Martin, could learn farming. And William B. was to raise him until he turned 21, at which time he was to provide him with some money, a Bible, and some clothing, and for being indentured to him. And so I wondered, what was going on? Why did Catherine give up her son to William B? Was Catherine somehow related to William? Was there some other circumstance going on? Throughout my research in general in genealogy, typically when an indenture like this happens, it's usually a situation where maybe Martin's father had died and Catherine could no longer provide for her son, and she gave him to Martin, gave her son Martin to William because that improved his successes in life. Or the alternative could be that perhaps Martin was illegitimate and her family and perhaps her herself thought it was best to provide her son to somebody else to raise. So Y-DNA is perfect to answer this. So I recruited somebody who is a direct male descendant of Martin Eckleberry to take a Y-DNA test. And I started with the basic because I needed to understand through Y37 what kind of results would he have before I invested in something greater. Well, his results showed that he didn't have very many matches. And the ones that he did, those matches at the genetic distance of 4, so there was at least 4 mutations, had the surnames of Journey, Russell, and Hickson. And really, there was only 3 surnames, 1 each. Nothing conclusive. And there was notably absent was any names of Eckleberry or something related to it. So my question then became, well, maybe he was illegitimate. Alternatively, maybe nobody with the name Eckleberry has ever tested their Y-DNA. Perhaps the name is so unique that they don't need to take a Y-DNA test in order to assess their own ancestry. So what I did was I recruited another Eckleberry to test that is not known to be related to Martin. But both Martin and the additional DNA tester I have, they have ancestral origins to Monroe County, Ohio, which is where Martin was indentured to William B. Wilson. So Eckleberry is not a common name. And so if I recruited from the same county, there's a great chance that they should be related on their Y-DNA if they are in fact. Catherine is probably a sister or a cousin to George Eccleberry, who is the oldest ancestor for the additional individual I recruited. The testing results came back for the additional targeted tester, and the surname match that he had at a genetic distance of 3 was, one of them was an Eccleberry. And so it looks like Martin Eccleberry, his father, was probably not an Eccleberry. And more important to this, tester A and B did not match each other at Y37. So it is quite probable that Martin was illegitimate and that Catherine gave him up either because maybe she was dying or because he was illegitimate. The best thing, or what she was encouraged by her family, was to give her son up for indentured. Now, so I've answered my research question. Obviously, this raises additional questions that it can direct my documentary and subsequent DNA analysis. My last example here is about the research question about relatedness. This is again on my line, and in the year 1850, my ancestor was living in a small town in Meigs County, Ohio. I also noticed in this same small town, there were 4 other male Wilsons living there, all born between the years 1809 and 1825. I wondered, were they related? And why I wondered was I did not know my ancestors' parents. And I thought if I could expand the family circle, if you will, from my ancestor to an additional 4 others, then I have potentially 4 other lines that I could potentially research to discover if their parents were known. Maybe I could begin to assess whether their parents were also the parents of my ancestor. So my research question was, were all of these 5 men related on their paternal line? My hypothesis was that they probably were related, and they were probably brothers or cousins. And if that was my hypothesis, a Y37 DNA match or test would be perfect. So I recruited male descendants on the paternal with uninterrupted paternal lines going back to what I now know to be their common ancestor, but at the time I did not. So I recruited them. And you'll notice that one of the ancestors, or one of the individuals that lived in this small town in Meigs County, I had not at this point, at the time of testing, realized that he had descendants. I hadn't yet proved that. That's why there's no recruited tester there. The genetic results, or the genetic distance between these 4 individuals, myself included, was all within a genetic distance of 2, which suggests that they are likely pretty closely related. This gave me enough confidence to say, well, if they all match at the Y37 level, let me go up and increase this to the big Y, which is what I did. And I recruited, as you'll see here now, at the time I upgraded everybody to the big Y. I had then subsequently learned that William B. Wilson did have descendants, and I used theirs to upgrade. And the analysis shows, as I previously discussed, that all of these people, all of these males descend from a common ancestor that we now know, and I have confirmed through documentary records, that it was John Wilson. And this is how the big Y and Y DNA could subsequently prove it. And when I had this and I discovered the documentary record tying them all together, it made sense because I had not only a document suggesting it, but I now also had DNA confirming it. So, in conclusion, why DNA is an excellent tool for answering a number of research questions, from figuring out where did my paternal line come from, to determining how unlinked family clusters within my autosomal DNA matches, how they might be related to me. It can help us determine unknown parentage and specifically paternal ancestry, and whether men of the same surname, and sometimes maybe not the same surname, are closely related. So I hope you enjoyed learning about how Y-DNA testing can be used to answer research questions, and by doing it using a targeted DNA tester. If you'd like to learn more about this, I encourage you to look at my handout or check my website out at myfamilypattern.com, where I have a YouTube channel and other resources to help you learn about Y-DNA and other DNA and documentary research strategies. Thank you.